At 8:31 in the morning, 6 small drones lifted off from a snow-covered field outside Minsk and turned toward a Russian airbase 12 kilometers away. Each one was a machine anyone could buy in a shop, rebuilt to carry 200 grams of explosive. They were the last 6 of an 8-drone operation, and their target sat on the frozen apron at Machulishi, a Beriev A-50U, a 4-engine flying radar the size of an airliner, its giant dorsal dome watching hundreds of kilometers of sky over Ukraine. It was one of the most valuable aircraft Russia owned, and the crews believed the air defenses around it made it untouchable. Within the hour, those crews would watch it burn, never understanding why their defenses stayed silent. What was about to destroy a flying radar worth hundreds of millions was a handful of drones that cost a few thousand between them. The operation had taken weeks of preparation, and it had not started with explosives. In the days before, 2 scouts, the same kind of quadcopter, carrying cameras instead of warheads, had flown over the airfield, close enough to read the markings on the dome, low enough to slide under a radar built to find fighter jets, not small flying cameras. A consumer drone over a military base looked like a nuisance, if the defenders noticed it at all, and that was the whole point. One of those scouts even landed on the dome of the A-50 and took off again, untouched and unnoticed. Between them, the 2 scouts brought back everything the operators needed: the exact spot where the aircraft parked, the rhythm of the perimeter guards, the rooftop where a marksman worked, the road the fire trucks would use, and a squat fuel storage building 100 meters from the aircraft's nose. The operators were Belarusian partisans from a network called BYPOL, men who had once worn the uniform of the state they were now sabotaging, and who knew exactly how that state guarded its airfields. They did not need to shoot down a 190-ton aircraft in the air, they only needed to reach it on the ground, and the scouts had just proven they could. On the morning of the attack, there was no more scouting, only the strike. The 6 armed drones came in 2 waves. The first wave was 3 drones, and all 3 were the same commercial airframe as the scouts, a DJI-class quadcopter, the kind sold for around $2,000, rebuilt by hand into a weapon. Each carried 200 grams of explosive packed with 200 steel balls. 200 grams sounds like nothing against the skin of a giant radar plane, so the partisans were not aiming at the skin. They were aiming at the dome, the antennas, and the wiring, the parts that made the aircraft a working system instead of an empty hull. The first wave's job was to open the attack and force the base to show its defenses. What it did not know was how badly it would miss, and how much that miss would help the wave behind it. The 3 of them crossed the perimeter at 8:43, flying 15 meters per second, hugging the tree line. The base had a wide area surveillance network watching the whole sky, and it saw nothing worth reporting. Drones this small, this slow, and this low gave back radar returns that were almost impossible to separate from the ground behind them. The network was built to ignore anything crawling along at 15 meters per second. It was, in effect, deleting the threat on its own. No alarm went up. The drones had 900 meters left to fly. Then a short-range Tor M2 battery caught them. The Tor is a serious weapon, a tracked launcher built to knock low-flying targets out of the sky from 15 kilometers away, with 4 missiles ready to fire at once. It picked up the lead drone at roughly 2 kilometers and started building a firing solution. But the Tor has a weakness the partisans were counting on. Its missiles have a minimum range of 1 kilometer, and inside that distance, they cannot arm in time to work. At 15 meters per second, a drone crosses that final kilometer in 67 seconds, and the firing solution needed almost all of that time to finish. The crew watched the solution come together and the range fall apart at the same time. The numbers crossed. The drone slipped inside the 1 kilometer floor, and the Tor could no longer shoot. So the Tor handed the problem to the jammers. A Groza counter-drone team was already turning toward the threat. trying to break the drone's control links. On paper, the jammer should have won this fight easily. It could overpower a drone's command and video signals from more than a kilometer away. But it needed time to work. Its full cycle, from picking up a target to actually jamming it, took between 30 seconds and 2 minutes, and the drones only spent 67 seconds inside that last kilometer. The jammer reached them late in the final stretch, and that was just enough to do the wrong kind of damage. 2 of the 3 video feeds broke into static. Those 2 operators, flying blind for a few seconds, felt their drones drift. They corrected from memory. It was not enough. The rooftop marksman had been waiting for this exact moment. He was holding an SVD, a Dragunov rifle that can hit a man at 1,300 meters. But a drone is not a man. At 500 meters, the little machines slid sideways across his scope, crossing 100 meters of sky every 6.5 seconds. And right behind them stood the one thing he could not hit, the A-50 itself. He picked the clearest of the 3, let it, breathed out, and fired into the gap between the drone and the aircraft. The round caught the drone. It came apart in the air and fell short of the apron. He had hit one. There were still 2 more, and they were the 2 already drifting. Those 2 never reached the aircraft. Already blind, already pushed off their lines by the jammer, they crossed the nose of the A-50 and slammed one after the other into the fuel storage building 100 meters beyond it. For half a second, it looked like the attack had failed. 1 drone shot down, 2 more wasted on a shed. Then the fuel went up. A wall of orange fire climbed off the building, and black smoke rolled flat across the apron in the cold morning air. Every alarm on the base went off at once. The defenders, who had been hunting a few small contacts, were suddenly fighting a fire instead. Fire and rescue trucks tore out of their bays toward the burning building, driving straight across the open ground in front of the aircraft. Crews ran toward the flames. The rooftop marksman lost his view completely as the smoke drifted between his scope and the sky and turned the morning into a gray wall. The 2 missed drones had not been wasted. They had blinded the base. And 90 seconds behind the first wave, flying at the same 15 meters per second, the second wave was already crossing the perimeter. This was the wave that mattered. 3 more drones, the ones the partisans had held back for exactly this moment. Time to arrive while the defenders were looking the wrong way. That 90-second gap meant that when the fuel store went up, they were still more than a kilometer out. Close, but not yet in sight. The fire had just opened a corridor for them. The operators called them Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, and they came in on 3 separate routes. Alpha aimed for the great dome on the aircraft's back. Bravo aimed for the cockpit and the communications gear packed in behind it. Charlie aimed for the inboard engines and the wing route. 3 drones, 3 targets, and a defense that was distracted and half blind. The Tor crew tried to fire again and ran into the same problem that had stopped them on the first wave. Only this time, it was worse. The first wave had been 3 targets on roughly 1 line. Now, there were 3 more, spread wide apart and already inside the 1-kilometer floor where the missiles could not arm. The Tor can track 4 targets at once, but firing solutions are worthless against targets already under the floor. It stayed silent. The jammer crew swung toward the new drones and lost the seconds they needed. A cycle that takes 30 seconds to 2 minutes cannot chase 3 drones on 3 headings in the time it had. 1 feed flickered. All 3 kept flying on the headings already loaded into them, no longer needing a control link at all. The perimeter guards finally saw the second wave at 200 meters, 13 seconds of flight away. They raised their rifles. They could not fire. Behind the drones stood the burning fuel store, the rescue crews crossing the open ground, the ground personnel, and the aircraft itself. Every direction was full of their own people. There was a clean line of fire for only a handful of seconds, and in those seconds, a man had to spot the target, identify it, decide it was safe to shoot, lead it, and pull the trigger. The guards held their fire for the few seconds that mattered. Those few seconds were all the drones needed. Alpha reached the dome first. It struck the base of the dome and detonated. 200 grams of explosive and 200 steel balls tearing into the structure that defined the whole aircraft. The steel balls did what a small charge alone could not. They shredded the skin and the antenna faces across a wide arc and turned the most recognizable part of the airframe into torn metal. Flames climbed the back of the aircraft. What was left of the firefighting effort turned upward toward the burning dome, which was the exact moment Bravo arrived at the front of the plane. Bravo dropped toward the forward fuselage, over the cockpit, and the mission system bay packed in behind it. The last picture that operator saw before his feed cut out was the curve of the dome, which he used to steer through the smoke. Then the screen went black with the explosion. A second blast tore open the front section, and the heat and fragments reached past the skin into the wiring and the avionics, the nervous system that turned a spinning radar dish into a picture of the sky. Charlie came in last, on the far side, while the crews were still split between the dome and the cockpit. It struck the inboard engine and the wing root, and the third blast opened a fuel and oil fire under the wing. Now there were 3 fires on the aircraft at once: the dome, the nose, and the wing. On top of the fuel building still burning 100 meters away. There were not enough hands on the apron, and the A-50 was burning faster than anyone could fight it. By the time the smoke began to clear, the A-50 on the apron no longer looked like a working machine. The dome was scorched black and torn open. The forward fuselage was breached above the cockpit. One wing was blackened where the engine had burned. Smoke poured off the aircraft and drifted across a spot where, an hour earlier, it had been the most valuable aircraft in the Russian fleet. The eye that had watched all of Ukraine's sky had gone dark in front of the very defenses built to protect it. 8 drones bought from a shop, worth perhaps $15,000 before the handmade charges, had reached a strategic radar aircraft that open reporting commonly values at around $330 million. That is a ratio of more than 20,000 to 1, and it happened 12 kilometers from the center of Minsk, while the best air defense systems in Belarus stood within sight of the target. The aircraft did not lose because its defenders were incompetent. They shot 1 drone out of the air and watched 2 more burn against a shed, and it still was not enough. Every layer protecting the A-50 had been built for a different war. The surveillance network was tuned for fighter jets and missiles, so it filtered out small drones. The Tor was built for targets beyond a kilometer, and the drones crossed inside that range. The Jammer was built to win a fight that lasted longer than 67 seconds. The Marksman's rifle was built for men, not for small machines sliding sideways with an aircraft behind them. Every system worked exactly as it was designed to. The design was the flaw. The flying radar that once told Russia where every threat in the sky was hiding never stopped the drones crossing its own fence. Somewhere outside another airfield, the same kind of drone is already in the air.